mic.
C'est tout ce comme lui. Pas un dia ponga gopa san. O san de trinile. Melingwa me babo. O shalushe c'est tout ce comme lui. Pas un dia ponga gopa san. Sunday twenty-le, Titisha, Lucie, c'est tout ce comme c'est tout ce comme
It's Power to Truth with Bill Nkobotse, JJ Tabane, coming to you from our studios here in Hyde Park in Johannesburg. Tonight, we're dipping our heads for all of those who died of the coronavirus. 33,000, more than 33,000 dying at the hands of this vicious virus. For you who's affected and infected by this deadly virus, we say, have strength. Lift your eyes to your own Creator at this point, because we all need a solution that can stem the tide of what is really becoming a serious pandemic all over the world. I've brought two big brains tonight to help me understand how the country is handling the virus itself. We've heard of the second variant. Some are saying it's more vicious than the first. Some are saying it's more infectious than the first one. Other scientists are saying, oh, there's no evidence that it's much more vicious than the first wave. So we could try and understand some of those things. But the big question for me is, countries are already vaccinating their people. We are, of course, in line to receive our first batch of vaccinations next month. Are there African solutions to this? You'd remember at the beginning of the virus, or rather the lockdown, there was a lot of discussion about Madagascar and how we should throw our weight behind a locally manufactured solution or medicines, indigenous knowledge systems, and how they should come to bear. I would like to also explore that kind of discussion. Khandani Msibi, who's the CEO of the 360 Group, as well as Professor Jeff Mphahlele from the Medical Research Council, are my guests tonight on the round table to explore these issues. We take time off on Power to Truth and just inform ourselves about how this virus is affecting us. The revolution starts now.
C'est tout ce comme lui. Pas un dia ponga gopa.
Soweto Central Choir ushering us into our conversation tonight. A very, very heavy subject matter. The world being engulfed by a virus unknown, and as we have seen, we're learning its spots as we go along, learning how it mutates, learning how it has to be handled. We remember at the beginning of the lockdown, there was a lot of talk about it not affecting younger people. Now, this looks like the second strain is also affecting younger people. It's a mess, South Africa. We need to admit. The question is, are we handling it well as a country, and will we be able to ride the storm? Let me introduce my guests once again. Khandani Msibi, who's the Group Chief Executive of 360 Group of Companies, as well as Professor Jeff Mpatlele from the Medical Research. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us here on Power to Truth tonight.
Good evening.
Good evening, JJ.
Professor.
No, wonderful. Prof, let me start with you. I mean, just to lay the basis for our discussion, it's been, what, we're approaching a year now since the first lockdown. And what would be your overall assessment? Where you are sitting, I'm sure you got a lot of a bird's eye view. You got reports from far and wide. You have access to also scientific knowledge from around the world and how the other countries have handled the virus. How would you score us if we were your students and we had to write a paper about how South Africa handled the virus? How would you score us as a country? Have we done our best, or have we sort of just passed? You know, in the university you had what you call Madoda score, you know, where you just get 51 and you are all right. Or have we done this with distinction to save the lives of our people?
Yes, thanks for having me once again. Every country is different, JJ. So obviously, when you compare yourself to other countries, you need to be mindful of that because there are some similarities, but at the same time, you know, every country is unique. It's got its own, you know, challenges. It's got its own issues that it has to take into account, responding to the pandemic. So if we rewind, you know, the history a little bit, when we first, you know, got the case of COVID-19 in the country from, you know, the travelers, we have seen, you know, the leadership of the country, you know, taking ownership of the process. And I'm happy that even today, you know, fast forwarding this to the current situation today, we still see, you know, the leadership of the country, you know, owning the process. Obviously, the response is not perfect, and you will notice that it's not just for South Africa. For many countries, they are innovating as they go along. Part of the reason is because most countries have never experienced the pandemic of this magnitude. Certainly for South Africa, it's the first time we deal with the pandemic of this magnitude. We dealt with, you know, outbreaks that we can, you know, easily contain, but this is the real test. I often tell people that if you compare ourselves with, you know, countries like DRC, some countries in the Western Africa, West Africa rather, they've got a lot of experience dealing with outbreaks of more or less of this magnitude.
Such as Ebola
for
and
us,
so on.
this is exactly, you know, but for us, this is the first time. And because of that, yes, we need to be, you know, hard on ourselves. If we don't respond the way, you know, everybody would like us to respond. But at the same time, we just have to bear that in mind, that this is the first time.
Khandani, let me come to you on that score. There was a lot of nervousness by business about the lockdown, right? Initially, there was a support, and none of us thought that the lockdown was last an entire year. I mean, we're approaching a year of lockdown, right? So there was a lot of support at the beginning, but once we got to 6 months, businesses in particular started panicking to say, no, you are destroying the economy and so on. Do you think that there could have been a better striking of the balance in terms of the health matter issues and the lives, as they put it, and livelihoods, not having a situation like we have now where 2 million people lost their jobs in the process?
JJ, good evening. Good evening to the professor and to the listeners. I think as the professor has rightly described it, it's a pandemic, it's a crisis. And in a crisis, there are no clear and good answers. But what is necessary when you are dealing with a crisis is quick decision-making and correction of decisions that don't work much quicker, because balancing between livelihood and lives is a very difficult and sometimes cruel balance. I mean, if you save a man and you take his means of feeding his family, but you've saved his life, you're still sitting with a problem. But again, if you lose his life, have you really saved the economy? I don't think this is a matter that anybody can ever be perfect. This is one thing that you manage with hindsight and with frequent decision making. I think there's been some good decisions, and there's been some decisions that needed to have been reviewed much quicker than we did as a country. Yeah. But it will be hard to critique and condemn only without providing solutions. And I think that's where society has not been helpful, in that those who are feeling the negative consequences of the livelihood decision will complain, and those who are feeling the negative consequences of the life decision will complain. And maintaining that balance is a very hard balance, but I think the only remedy for me is frequent decision making, so that we can direct this thing as we go along, because we're dealing with a virus that is a single track of mind. It infects you, get into your cell, it replicates, it gets your immune system to overreact. That's all it does. But I think part of what we struggle with is that as humans, we tend to be too clever for our own good, and we have too many opinions. There are no opinions in the virus domain. Everybody or every virus is pulling in the same direction, but humans are not pulling in the same direction. And those are the challenges that we're having, that we have too much variability amongst ourselves.
Yeah. Prof, if you can just pick up on that issue, there's too many opinions. There was opinions around whether or not, because this thing has to do with the respiratory system largely, right? And that's how it looks like, that's how it enters and starts attacking you, that smoking was a no-no. And people said, no, but you've got to ban smoking, otherwise we're going to have a mess, right? And then, I hope you heard me there, because there seems to have been interference. The second part was the alcohol. So I want you just to deal...
There was a bit of interference.
Yeah. So the first one was to say, the cigarettes, and there was varying opinions, that you're going to make it worse if people are smoking all over the show. Please cut smoking. That was a to and fro to court and what have you. Then there was the issue of alcohol, to say you're going to burden your health system, cut alcohol, at some point bring it back, then cut it again. From medically, right, as someone sitting where there's research about medicine and so on, can you give me a quick opinion on just those two issues that were part of the discourse around handling the coronavirus, Prof?
Yes. So at the beginning, obviously, we did not have the information, all the information that was needed for decision making. We were relying very much on the literature that was coming out from China, which experienced, the initial outbreak. So the literature, even if it was not conclusive at that point, but there was some evidence that those who are smoking, they seem to experience severe outcome of infection. So it's not like when you smoke, you will have a higher risk of getting the virus. In other words, transmission is higher in those who are smoking. But it's the outcome of infection that matters. And then if you couple that with the need of, health care, obviously one is likely to make a decision that we need to reduce the smoking, we need to do this and that. So obviously, in a hindsight, we now know that even if you do experience severe outcome of infection, if you are a heavy smoker, obviously, we don't have to stop people smoking, and these are just part of the decisions that were made earlier on, and it's good that we don't have to make that kind of a decision right now. So with liquor,
alcohol,
obviously, we know the impact in terms of overburdening, the healthcare services. So it's not just about the healthcare services, JJ. If you think about even the healthcare workers, that they are under severe stress because of the higher numbers of people who will end up in casualties, and obviously this will divert the resources. Healthcare workers, the healthcare delivery, it will affect the resources. So it's not like there's no science in making these decisions. There is science in making the decisions, but then we understand that as part of making the decision, you interfere with the rights of other people.
Yeah. Mr. Msibi, I want after the break to ask for you to lead us on the whole issue of indigenous knowledge systems. Do you think, like, in the entirety of how we have handled the virus for the last year or and a bit, or a year or so, that we have relied on our own scientists here to guide us, number one, on how to handle the virus? Secondly, is there hope for an indigenous application of the indigenous knowledge system in coming up with an African solution to this thing? We are hearing of all kinds of solutions coming from the West or from India or from wherever else, but is there enough conversation about indigenous knowledge systems being applied today? I want you to lead us on that straight after the break. We are talking the coronavirus tonight. We're informing ourselves about what is happening over here. And, of course, after the break, we continue with our panel of experts to try and understand whether or not should we be finding African solutions for this or not. Let's take a break now.